and welcome to Globe Watch with me, Charles Abune, from the Accra International Conference Center here in the Ghanaian capital. Of course, the first country, Africa south of the Sahara, to gain independence. That was in 1956. And this is where the 30th General Assembly meetings of the Africa Export-Import Bank have been going on, which equally doubled as the 30th anniversary of the institution at a time when Africa is celebrating 60 years of political and economic unity. The big names in the financial sector, especially in the banking sector, but equally in the political realm, were present here to attend the 30th General Assembly meetings of the Africa Export-Import Bank, amongst them Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo, but equally dignitaries from around the world, including the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who, of course, explores with me today as guest on Globe Watch the relationship between Africa and the Caribbean community under CARICOM today. Just what are the common values they share together at a time when the prosperity of the continent is a key element of political justification? Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed for talking to the Cameroon Radio Television. First, what is the connection between the Caribbeans and your country in particular, and Africa, where we are found?
Well, to begin with, the majority of the population is of African descent. Thousands were brought there as enslaved African bodies in the period after 1763, between 1763 and 1807. And prior to that, the Africans who came there, those who ran away from plantations in Barbados, which is just 100 miles away, that came by canoes. There was a shipwreck with African slaves. And a small number came with some French planters a little before that time. But the bulk of the African population came after British colonialism was established and a slave system was put in place for the cultivation of sugarcane and other agricultural products.
Now, there has been an increase of exchanges of recent between Africa and the Caribbeans, and your country in particular, through what they call the CARICOM community. How unique was it for you to be here in Ghana for the 30th General Meetings and anniversary of the Afri-Exim Bank, that is the Africa Import-Export Bank?
Well, for 2 years or so, CARICOM, at least some countries within CARICOM, the Caribbean community, we have been working to establish relations with the Afri-Exim Bank. The point about it is this: we have a shared experience with Africa, and that shared experience must have a shared expression for development, and part of that expression is to have institutional arrangements, of which the Afri-Exim Bank is one such expression. And 11 countries have of CARICOM have signed on to the partnership agreement, and I'm expecting the other 2 or 3 others will sign on very shortly. But Africa and the Caribbean have had a link apart from slavery, that particular time when the British colonialists captured persons and brought them as enslaved bodies. We have had links between political links, personalities like Marcus Garvey, George Padmore.
And the list can go on.
The list can go on for a long, long time. And then, of course, we have contemporary problems. So there are, apart from issues of historical legacy, their contemporary challenges which we face, climate change, the ravages of the contradictions of monopoly capitalism. These provide circumstances to induce us to have a joinder.
Okay.
And I'm suggesting that we establish an ABCD commission, a permanent commission, Africa, Brazil, Caribbean, and the diaspora outside of the Caribbean, like in North America and Europe, to oversee a lot of these connections in practical terms.
Okay. One of the key economic elements shaping the African market today is the African Continental Free Trade Area. Last year, I had a conversation with the Prime Minister of Antigua, your colleague, and he was talking about how relations with Africa and the Caribbean community should be built on trade, tourism, transport. Are those the same areas that you equally see for business on both sides of the Atlantic?
Yes, yes. There are those issues, and of course, you have to build the political institutional arrangements and the financial institutional arrangements.
Okay.
Trade doesn't happen without ships. Tourists don't happen without planes.
Oh.
So that all of these matters which have to be worked out. I've concluded an air services agreement with Ghana. I've concluded other agreements with other African countries.
Oh.
And there's only one African country which doesn't require a visa to come to my country, and that is for a specific set of circumstances which arose, and that's being reviewed. So in the case of St. Vincent and Grenadines, we are very open for persons to come and visit us, and investment to come as tourists if you want. I have over 100 medical students from Nigeria and Ghana in St. Vincent. I've given scholarships to a few students from Ghana to do the Bachelor's of Nursing degree. So they're practical things. We need to build the links with culture and sports, which young people are interested in naturally.
One but last question, Mr. Prime Minister. There are so many countries in the Caribbean. Let's talk about St. Vincent and the Grenadines. What makes your country specific, unique in the CARICOM community? In simple English, if I have to leave my native country, Cameroon, or somebody who is in Ghana, why should that person decide to go to your country?
I want to tell you first two important historical reasons why there's a special place of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the historiography of the Caribbean. The first one, the shortest period of slavery in the entire Caribbean is in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Okay.
And the reason for this, centrally, is because the indigenous Kalinago and Garifuna fought the British. There was in fact, when the British came in 1763, after they concluded an arrangement with the French, between 1764 and 1795, for 31 years, there was a guerrilla war fought by the indigenous people, our forebears. The Kalinago and the Garifuna being a mixture between the indigenous Amerindians and Africans. And fought the British, the might of the British, for that long period of time. We are the last country in the Americas where there was such a resistance to colonialism. Okay. So you want to, we are born in struggle.
Okay. The second reason.
So I gave those two historical reasons: the shortest period of the enslavement of African bodies, and secondly, the nature of native resistance.
Okay.
St. Vincent and Grenadines, we're an archipelago. We have 32 islands. The only island chain which has more islands is way up in the north, in the Bahamas. We are a country of different dimensions. The main island is of volcanic origin. The other islands are of coral formation, so you have rivers and waterfalls and tropical forests on the main island. And in the Grenadine Islands, the offshore islands, you have white sand beaches. And so there's different kinds of tourism. Barbados, for instance, is beautiful and flat.
Sure,
but,
Mr. Prime Minister.
But it doesn't have rivers and mountains.
Absolutely, Mr. Prime Minister. And maybe about 30 seconds before we entered to do this interview, you told me that your wife used to be in Cameroon, my home nation.
Yes.
What was you can answer it in about 30 seconds because of time constraint.
My wife went there with her father and mother. Her father was a judge in the Court of Appeal in the Cameroons. FOC Harris, from Dominica, from the Caribbean. And she went there when she was a young lady.
When was that?
Student.
That should be many years ago.
That would have been in the 60s.
And 70s.
Early 60s, early 70s.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for talking to the Cameroon Radio Television. We hope to see you one day in Cameroon.
You will see me. I know the president. I know many officials in Cameroon.
So what message do you have for President Biya?
Give my brother my warmest regards and his dear wife.
Madam Chantal Biya.
Madam Chantal.
Absolutely, they will hear that. You are welcome. You are welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome. Jeremy Awori, thank you very much indeed for being guest on my program.
No, glad to be here.
I just watched you sign few seconds ago a document at the main hall where the ceremonies to mark the 30th anniversary of the Afri-Exim Bank are taking place. What actually did that mean?
Yeah, so we were signing the Memorandum of Understanding around the Pan-African settlements program across the continent. It's also called PAPS. Now, what that really does is it looks around how can we make quite efficient the payments and settlement system across the continent. Because if you're going to be doing trade, you need to make payments. And right now, a lot of our payments go outside the continent, whether it's to Europe or to the US. There's lots of lags.
Costing roughly $5 billion annually lost to the continent.
Yeah, it's expensive. It's not as efficient as it could be. So if we really want to encourage trade across the continent, which is the whole concept of Africa Continental Free Trade, we have to have payments as part of that. So EcoBank was one of the first signatories into this arrangement with the PAPS system among 4 other banks. And we're excited really to leverage our 33 countries where we have banking operations to facilitate that. And that's the role we're playing. Because even within the PAPS system, they're not present in all those countries. So as EcoBank, what we're able to do is to bring our connections with the central bank and other banks there to facilitate those payments for people's transactions.
And it's an e-platform which goes a long way to ease the financial transactions within the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area. That justifies the presence of the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because without payments, trade becomes hard. As you said, it's costing the continent, it's costing our business, it's costing our competitiveness.
What kind of comments or evaluation do you make of the work of the Afri-Exim Bank 30 years on while you are here to attend the meeting? What kind of contribution have they made to Africa's development from your perspective?
Yeah, like you heard today, you've seen all the successes that they've had, the contributions in terms of financing, where they've come from, in terms of the size of their asset base, the projects that they're signing and supporting. And then today you've heard of further projects that they're working with. They're also working with many of the Caribbean states also, which I think is quite encouraging. They've made significant progress and made a big impact on the continent. And that's why even we and other banks also want to partner with them so that we can even make a further impact. And we've seen a number of the heads of state, prime ministers, ministers, among others, really talking about what do we need to do in this next chapter. It's not been an easy ride the last few years, whether it was COVID, the Russia-Ukraine war, the macroeconomic environment. And I think the feeling really is going forward, what can we do to support our countries across the continent to do better, to uplift lives, to trade better, and to create economic value and competitiveness for us globally.
And what kind of role will EcoBank Group, which is one of the biggest African-owned banking conglomerates, be playing in this newfound business environment of roughly 1.5 billion people, an annual GDP of roughly $3 trillion? I'm talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area. What kind of role will you be playing in this new environment to add value, like you just said, to our businesses, to our trade, to all what we do?
That was the very purpose of EcoBank's formation many years ago, which was how do we bring financial services, world-class financial services across the continent? How do we bring increased penetration of those financial services to uplift countries and the citizens across the continent? And that's really what we do. We have the largest network of countries of any banking group. We're in 33 countries where we have full banking operations, and then another 2 where we have rep offices. And really what we're trying to do is really facilitate banking, payments, and supporting individuals and businesses and governments to basically finance their transactions, make payments, do cash collections, across the continent. So we're well placed on that. We have a single gateway system that we are able to use to process those payments. So we see lots of opportunities to support not just corporate clients, but also upcoming what we call SME clients, local businesses. With our single gateway platform, we can take your business from one country into another without you having to go into 33 countries or 35 countries. We can do that for you. So we want to be a partner for many of the tech companies, whether it's fintech, agri-tech, health tech, edu-tech. We want to work in areas like agriculture, and we want to use digital technology to deliver the most cost-effective solutions, which will be important to increase competitiveness of our businesses.
Your bank itself, in the moment the interview will come to an end, runs a foundation which provides corporate social responsibility services to communities across the continent. Statistics indicate that roughly 44 million small and medium-sized enterprises exist in Africa south of the Sahara. As we draw closer to the end of the interview, how have you empowered young people, women in particular, over the years?
Yeah, to answer that specifically, we've launched an Elevate program, which is really to specifically focused on women entrepreneurs, women in business, not just getting access to capital, but also getting skills, building their networks, and getting to thrive not just in their local communities, but also even taking their businesses international. We believe whilst we've done a lot in there, for example, we've raised 500 million in deposits, 250 million of lending US dollars to women-run businesses. There is still a lot more that we can do. We've heard about it today in terms of the fact that women-run businesses in Africa has the highest number of by population of any continent, but we're not supporting them well enough. So I'm very passionate about pushing that agenda. But I think even if we look further around what else we can do for SMEs, I think we really need to look at digital solutions that are efficient, that can go and support entrepreneurs or people running business wherever they are to be able to bring their services to their customers, whether it's business customers or retail customers, or whether it's to exporting. We provide trade services. We've got the One Trade Hub where you can actually come and find buyers and sellers across the continent, and we can support you on payments. So there's many areas that we're able to support our clients on.
One but last question. What do you think is the greatest threat to intra-African trade, to businesses? I heard Aliko Dangote saying yesterday that the biggest threat we have is the movement of people across the continent. There are so many checks in terms of visa processing or whatsoever. Do you share his point of view?
Yeah, I've spoken with him about it, and we share that point of view. I mean, I'm experiencing it as an East African moving around in West Africa. Almost every country I need a visa. Okay. Yeah, which is not the same for ECOWAS countries because there's free movement of people. Okay. But I think if we're going to think Pan-African, it has to be Pan-African. Countries like Seychelles have removed visas for any African country. Okay. And there's a number of others as an example. So I think there needs to be movement of people. We need to obviously be sensitive about some of the local environmental issues. But I think we also need to look at other things. Non-tariff barriers are things which we have to look at. what are the frameworks we're using around digital? What are the frameworks around IP, that in terms of just that those protecting people's rights? What are the frameworks around consistent regulations? I can give you as an example. We operate in 35 African countries. We've got more than 35 regulators. They each have their own regulations, which they of course want to ensure are followed. But it does make for more complex running of a business. Okay. So I think we need to look at all these different things and step by step simplify, harmonize, to encourage us to trade amongst ourselves. We only do 14% of our trade is within Africa. That should be much more. And then we should be exporting out.
Okay. Finally, as a Pan-African banking institution, you just got into this job as the Chief Executive Officer of EcoBank. Your predecessor used to be my guest. If I may end this interview by asking you this question, what is your broad-based vision? How do you intend to manage EcoBank, let me say, in the next 5 years? I don't know how long the mandate, a single mandate, is at EcoBank.
So I've just come in. I'm just within the first 3 months, so it's fairly early days. What I can say is I want to build off the work of what my predecessor Adeyemi had graciously done during his term. I would like to see EcoBank significantly bigger. I'd like to see it contributing at scale across the continent, whether it's to individuals achieving their aspirations, or businesses or governments. I'd like to see us making an impact in meaningful areas that will impact our economies. And I think we've got the exact platforms that will allow us to do that. And we're going to use innovation, digital, and the power of our biggest talent, which is our people, to do that and to build pride in terms of what we're able to achieve as Africans in Africa for Africa.
And with that, we conclude the interview. The Chief Executive Officer of EcoBank Incorporated Limited. Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy Awori, for talking to the Cameroon Radio Television in your first TV interview with the Cameroonian audience.
Pleasure is mine.
You're welcome. The African Union Commissioner, Albert Muchanga, thank you very much indeed for being guest on our program.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
First, we just marked the Diamond Jubilee of Africa's unity. We are here to mark 30 years of the existence of the Africa Export-Import Bank here in Accra, Ghana.
Yes.
How will you qualify the economic situation on the continent today?
We are coming from a long history of underdevelopment. During the days of colonialism, our economies were shaped, first and foremost, to be producers and exporters of raw materials required for the industrialization of the metropolitan economies. And we are also the markets for the industrial goods of those economies. So when we gained independence, there were two models of development: import substitution and export diversification. Now, the process was highly dependent on importation of intermediate goods from developed countries. When the foreign exchange crisis emerged as a result of the debt situation in the 1980s, most of the import substitution industries could not continue. So the process of deindustrialization.
The IMF and the World Bank brought in structural adjustment programs.
Yes. So the process started. And as a result of that, that deindustrialization intensified. And over the years, around the 1990s, we were able to come up with the debt restructuring arrangements. under the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. And as a result of that, around 2000, we embarked on a new pattern of growth. And quite a lot of African countries were growing at high rates. And they were assisted also by emerging demand from China for raw materials from Africa. Some of our countries grew by as high as 19%. So, when you look now at the economic situation, first of all, the population is increasing. Secondly, there's marginal economic development. And as a result, we have not been able to overcome poverty.
Okay.
Let me just say, the population of Africa is about 1.4 billion people. And out of that, about 650 million Africans still live in conditions of poverty. So, with that, the economic situation is not good. We can do better.
You just indicated that the economic situation of the continent is not good, but we can do better.
Yes.
And one of the institutions embarked on a journey of making things better is the Africa Export-Import Bank, established 30 years ago by African governments.
Yes.
How do you rate their impact on the continent's development?
If you bring in the African Export-Import Bank, you also bring in the African Continental Free Trade Area. The African Continental Free Trade Area is aimed at increasing intra-African trade. The African Export-Import Bank provides trade finance. So it's going to play a very, very, very critical role boosting intra-African trade. First of all, with the payments and settlements. It has come up with a Pan-African payments and settlement system where transactions can take place in local currency with net settlements in foreign exchange on a daily basis.
Okay.
Then some people also need finance to come up with industrial establishment, to finance trade. The African Export-Import Bank is able to provide that. Annually, we face a deficit of about $120 billion in trade finance. But they are working very hard to ensure that they provide the necessary funding.
Mr. Albert Muchanga, thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and it was a pleasure having you.
My pleasure. Thank you. All the best.
You are welcome.